Do you know, it hit me the other day that I am now exactly the sort of person that I used to argue with. And by the end of this, maybe you'll hate me, but you'll understand why I left the left completely accidentally. About a month or so ago, I was having dinner in Amsterdam with a woman and her business partner that I'd never met before. Now, the woman happened to be German, which of course is neither here nor there, but she mentioned the Nazis. This was a little bit jarring for me because I think, we all feel a little bit like John Cleese in Fawlty Towers.
Don't mention the war.
But actually, what she was offering was an interesting perspective on the amount of Nazi gold that lies under Switzerland, and theories, enjoyable speculative theories on how it came to be there and the types of deals that were potentially done. I found her somewhat fascinating because she was 12 years old when the Berlin Wall came down, and she lived on the east side of Germany. But when I replay that dinner in my head, there was one moment where the tone of the conversation shifted, and it was when she flippantly made a remark referring to the patriarchy that we live in. Now, my internal monologue when she said that word was, just let it slide. Just let it slide. There's no need. There's really no need. But unfortunately, I don't possess that ability. I sometimes wish I did. But then she said that women's rights are being eroded. Unfortunately, at that point, the tongue holding became impossible. I asked a simple question. What rights do I have that you don't have? The tone of the conversation shifted. Her facial expression was a mixture of perplexity and anger, because of course the answer is none. And then I hit her with just a cold hard fact. 95 out of 100 work-related deaths are male. This is an uncomfortable fact, mainly because it doesn't fit with the narrative, the patriarchy narrative. If 95 out of 100 work-related deaths are men, then it is men that are sacrificed for the overall good and continuance of civilization. At this point, the body language and the eye contact shifted, and I couldn't help but think to myself in that moment just how far I drifted from the man I used to be. The type of conversation that I was having, it almost felt like I was an imposter in my own body. Not because I didn't believe my convictions in what I was saying, but because of the about turn that I've done in the last few years. As a way of kind of bridging the conversation back, I said to her that I was in fact a voter of Remain in the referendum, and that I'd been a fully paid up member of the Labour Party for 7 years. Money left my account every month straight into the pockets of the Labour Party so that I could continue the cause. What happened, she said, with a kind of grin on her face, I think expecting me to say, well, I got lost down the rabbit hole of YouTube, Alex Jones, conspiracy theories, etc. But that's not what happened. If you were to meet me on a cold Tuesday afternoon of 2018 or even 2021 or 2017, and we got into the subject of politics, you'd have ascertained fairly soon into the conversation that I was left-leaning, progressive, dare I say, even woke. I was as much of a champion as anybody else for the social causes, the evils of the British Empire, the disgust in the Tory sleaze, and the righteous plight of the moral left. But actually what was happening in my life at that time was I had an alcohol problem. By the time it got to its worst in 2022, I was drunk before going to bed every night. I would wake up in the morning feeling anxious, on edge, regretful. If you've been hungover ever in life, you know what I'm talking about. Disappointed in myself that I did it again last night and there's a day ahead of me. Immediately I would consume Sky News on the television. Phone would be going off with various alerts and notifications from all the different news apps. Sky News, New York Times, BBC News, Reuters, you name it, I had it. I'd have LBC on. I'd listen to James O'Brien where and when I could in his 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. slot. He was practically a hero of mine. It was completely lost on me, by the way, the irony of the fact that I didn't have a grip on my own life, but took the typical leftist stance that I knew what was best for everybody else's. I was barely even a passenger in my own life. I was just a consumer. The day consisted of exactly what I said, waking up, checking social media, and I'm checking social media to either be outraged by a comment on a story that's developing that I have the moral high ground on, or by somebody else's seemingly perfect life that I don't have, and that they probably have it because of something, not my fault, something. I think the single worst feeling I had, looking back now at that period, was the feeling of going nowhere fast, this purposeless, meaningless existence. And it all came to a head in May of 22 when I became the butt of the fat joke. I put on weight from what I was drinking. And when you drink a lot, other things happen. You order lots of takeout, you eat bad food, you don't have good discipline. And I decided that I was going to change overnight. And honestly, I thought that sobering up would simply, fix my liver and help me lose weight. I didn't realize that it would burn my politics to the ground. That was never the plan. Now, the obvious part of the detox was the alcohol, which I did pretty much overnight. I read a fantastic book, which gave me a taste for reading, actually, called The Joy of Being Sober, or The Joys of Being Sober by Catherine Gray. Recommend it to anybody who's trying to sober up. But the equally significant part of the detox was the information detox. I deleted the news apps. I switched off notifications. No more LBC. I even disconnected from live TV. I cancelled my contract with my TV provider. So no live TV to the house, no more Sky News. I completely removed myself from the world that lots of people live in, which is just a barrage of constant alert information and news alert. This thing's happened, that thing's happened, be outraged, this thing's happened, be outraged. And rather than simply receiving information, I was then able to choose information. And like I say, I started with that first book, but I got a taste for reading and would try and find something else to read. I subscribed to Audible, so I still wanted to listen to stuff. I didn't want to not consume information. I just wanted it to be of a higher grade and a higher quality. And podcasts. And this is when I stumbled on 3 authors that had the most significant impact anything's ever had on my life, in my adult life, certainly. The first was Nassim Taleb. Now, before reading Nassim Taleb, my concept of business owners and people that had money was that they were either just lucky, or they just inherited it, or it was easy for them because of their circumstances and blah, 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 blah. This is very much the leftist view. The leftist's view is it does come from a sense of jealousy. And the way to express that is to present the successful and the wealthy as simply greedy and lucky. But Nassim Taleb presents business owners and entrepreneurs in a completely different light. First of all, he explains that really what these practitioners are a group of people that are willing to risk, not take the salary, that most people would respond like a baby being deprived of its mother's milk if they were to be deprived of a month's salary check. These are people that bear risk and often fail. I had never considered the failure rate. And of course, we only hear about the winners, the people that have made it and that have been successful, but we don't hear about the losers. And losers aren't permanently losers. Some people lose 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times before eventually winning. But it takes a different caliber of person to bear the risk of an idea, a venture, with no guarantee whatsoever that it's going to work. And in his third book, Anti-Fragile, he has a little section dedicated to entrepreneurs. He, if he had it his way, would have a National Entrepreneur Day. And this would be the motto for National Entrepreneur Day. Most of you will fail, disrespected, impoverished, but we are grateful for the risks you are taking and the sacrifices you are making for the sake of the economic growth of the planet and pulling others out of poverty. You are at the source of our anti-fragility. Our nation thanks you. This was jarring for me because a view that I used to hold, which is that people that have got money and that are wealthy because they own businesses are just lucky and greedy, actually are the reason we live, the collective reason we now live in the sheer unprecedented levels of comfort that we live in. Now, the second author is an author called Tom Sowell. Of his many ideas, I think there's one that stands out as being the most jarring. Tom Sowell points out that marriage rates and education rates among Black Americans in the United States were more favorable before the civil rights movement. In other words, a position that I'd have considered to be unthinkable, which is that the civil rights movement was nothing but a good thing for everybody involved in the United States, actually had the reverse effect for those it was trying to help. I found it difficult emotionally to process what Tom Sowell was saying here, but he had the receipts to prove it. Not only that, Tom Sowell himself is a black American. I remember checking out videos of him talking. I recommend anybody, even if you don't like what I'm saying, I recommend listening to him if you haven't already, because he speaks with a fabulous New York accent. He kind of sounds like Richard Feynman, and his ideas are compelling. And all those factors combined meant that I couldn't resist this new information. I had to accept it, and now things are really starting to change. But the third author, David Deutsch, this is what shifted my view on Britain as this evil empire slave bear. In my younger years, as a child and a teenager, I adored the British Empire. I loved the story of America and the fact that so many places in America have places named after places in England. I used to have a Union Jack and a Star-Spangled Banner above my head, both full-size flags. But then I went through my socialist phase, and if you're on the left, unfortunately, you have to hate Britain. And you certainly have to hate the British Empire. It's an immutable, immovable position. So the two main concepts that define Deutsch's philosophy are good explanations versus bad explanations and error correction. So good explanations versus bad explanations. What are the elements that make a good explanation? A good explanation is hard to vary and falsifiable. A bad explanation is easy to vary and unfalsifiable. So, for example, a bad explanation. The ancients used to believe that the reason for the change in seasons was because a god, I can't even remember which one, it doesn't matter because you can interchange it with any god because this is a bad explanation. That a god was angry with the mortals on Earth and so punished them with winter. That's where winter comes from. Well, why is that a bad explanation? Well, it's easy to vary. You can switch, I think it's Hades, but you can switch Hades for Hermes or, whoever. And why not make it that he was pleased with the mere mortals and so that's why he gave them summer? And is it falsifiable? In other words, is there anything you can do? Are there any experiments you can run? Is there any observations you could make that could falsify the claim? No. It's not falsifiable, is it? In any way. But how are you gonna test the God theory? Are you gonna ask Hades? A good explanation when it comes to the seasons. As we know, the Earth spins on an axis, but it doesn't spin in a perfect circle. It tilts slightly. As it tilts closer to the sun, those are the summer months. Further away, those are the winter months. Is it falsifiable? Yes, it is falsifiable. You could. I mean, we know this now because of satellite imagery and. We could, and measurements that we've taken on Earth and measurements that we've taken using stars, and there's lots of things that we can do to prove it wrong. And is it easy to vary? No, well, not at all. You can't swap one component of the explanation for an arbitrary another component of the explanation. That would lead that explanation to collapse. So that's the marker of a good explanation. How does this connect to Britain? Well, during the Enlightenment, the way Britain and British society was run, there was a schism. It no longer was dogmatic. We sought good explanations and we error corrected based on those good explanations. And look, it didn't turn into a utopia overnight, but prior to the 17th, 18th century, including antiquity, societies were never able to get past a certain point because the dogma of religion or, whatever, religion usually, meant that you weren't able to go to surpass a certain level. But in the age of the Enlightenment, we started seeking something different, which wasn't adhering to the dogma of religion, but in seeking good explanations in order to error correct. And once that happened over the centuries, we've landed where we are now. And look, if where you are now is a place where you can turn on a tap and nice fresh water comes out, and you can have nice warm showers, and you can spend your Sundays recording YouTube videos to hopefully find an audience. And if you had a really decent lunch that consisted of a freshly cooked breadstick with cheese, onion, peppers, and some sort of dressing, it was delicious actually, then clearly you live in a society that has prioritized the improvement of its citizens. And so there was another belief flipped, the big bad Britain, which is the way the left views the British state. It's not true at all. It's the opposite. It's the most benevolent state that's ever existed. It's the most glorious, wonderful, benevolent state that has ever existed. And the Anglosphere is proof of that. Britain, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. We're going through some ideological problems at the moment, but these are the most successful countries to have ever existed, if you measure it by health of citizens. And so to go back to the dinner, from the German lady's perspective, I'd become radicalized. But I became radicalized by reading. I hadn't become radicalized by the online right or the alt-right or whatever you want to call it. The left is good at marketing itself. It's easy to be on the left. It requires no courage. You essentially just have to subscribe to whatever the ideas of the day are, especially now that so many of them have become institutionalized, especially in this country, in education, in government, council, the NHS, the fire service, the police service. But it's become dangerous because it believes the positions it holds to be axiomatic. In other words, it believes the positions it holds to be absolute and correct. In very much the same way religion did prior to the Enlightenment. To even question or contest views of the left is considered, they actually consider it an act of violence. They do equate words with violence. I actually feel more hopeful for Britain after my radicalization, because after learning about the history of the country, we've been through some pretty torrid, tough times, and it's looked pretty hairy at times, and we've come through. And if anybody out there would like to challenge me, or if they would like to attempt to see if their own views could be changed, they don't necessarily want to go as hard as I did, and they would say, maybe you're thinking, well, which one should I read? I would do two things. Disconnect from the news apps completely. Honestly, you won't miss anything. Is number one. And number two, read Tom Sowell's Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Fascinating. If you've made it this far, please do leave a comment. Tell me about your journey. Tell me what you disagree with. Subscribe. It helps me massively. Can't tell you how much it helps me. Makes my day as well when I see that I've got an extra subscriber. Or maybe you don't want to make my day. In that case, you can dislike. And what's the other thing? Like, dislike, comment, share. All the usual stuff, really. Thanks for watching.